friends, welcome back to my channel. Today is day 9 of Bookmas. Woo! So, I originally had on my calendar that day 9 is going to be the most surprising books of 2021, but I would rather do the most disappointing and then the most surprising books. So we're going to do the most disappointing books, and kind of like yesterday's video, which was the worst books I read this year, this is going to be mostly a speed round, and I'm not really going to go too far into it. So, here goes nothing. I'm going to start. I have 15 that are pretty disappointing this year. So I'm going to start at number 15 and go to number 1 as the most disappointing. 15 is Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe by Benjamin Eller Sanchez. It's just been such a hyped book that I was expecting some, like, magic and, like, just something super amazing, and, like, it was a perfectly fine book, but there was no magic, no sparks. I should have prefaced this video with this, but I just remembered. If I say that a book is disappointing, I still might have given it a really good rating. Just because I think it's disappointing doesn't mean that it was a terrible book. It just means that I had extra high hopes for that book, and it just didn't quite reach its full potential for me. Number 14 is Practical Magic by Alice Hoffman. I've never seen the movie, and now I'm not really interested now that I've read the book, but I don't really like character-driven books anyway, so as I think about it, you know, it might work in movie format, it just doesn't work in book format. But it was fine. I think I gave it yet another 3 stars. I just had really high hopes for it again. I thought, you know, magical sister witches, and this year I realized that I really like witches and books to do with witches, but that one just fell a little bit flat for me. Teen is Honey Girl by Morgan Rogers, I think. This one, yet again, got a ton of buzz when it first came out. It was the author's debut, and it was a fine book. I just didn't connect with the characters. I thought that the main character was very unlikable, and I just didn't buy the romance, and it's supposed to be a contemporary romance, and I just did not understand why the two fell in love with each other, and it just, I didn't feel it. It didn't make sense to me. And then number 12. So this year I worked on reading series and not being so afraid of them. So I read the entire Renegades trilogy by Marissa Meyer, and I adore that trilogy. That might be my favorite trilogy of all time. Maybe. But I hated the last book. Like, I just felt like the last book, which is Supernova, yeah, Supernova, kind of undid a ton of what was done in the first and second books and set up in the first and second books, and I felt like the third book was a waste. Of course, I still gave it 4 stars. Like, I told you, it was fine. It was actually good. There were just aspects and relationships that were built in the first 2 books that kind of just Marissa Meyer went a different direction than what I was hoping for. So I didn't love it as much as maybe you did. Number 11, I finally read a Peter Swanson novel. He was on my 10 authors I must read this year, or in 2021. And I finally read a book by him called Her Every Fear. And, you know, it was like a predictable thriller. I gave it 3 stars. It was fine. But for some reason in my head, I have seen a lot of his books on BookTube before. And here's Bella. And I just thought that reading a Peter Swanson book would, like, change my life. And I would be somehow changed because I read that book. But I wasn't. Like, it was just a predictable thriller. Number 10 is My Lovely Wife by Samantha Downing. So I went into this thinking that it was going to be about this couple who murders together to keep their marriage alive, and that is not true. That is how it is pitched, and I don't want to go into details because that's called spoilers. But if you want to know, DM me on Instagram and I can tell you why I hated this book so much, because it's not what it sounds like. It sounds like, oh, you know, we kill together and it keeps our marriage spicy. But that is not at all what happens. And I'm going to leave it at that because I literally can't tell you anything else. Number 9, 8 and 9 and 8 are by the same author, so I'm just going to talk about them both at the same time. I found my love for romance this year. And 2 of the disappointing romances that I read were by Christina Lauren. And that kills me because they wrote some really good books too. But Roomies and In a Holidays are my 2 least favorites by this author duo so far. I still need to read a lot of their books, but Roomies, I've read a few books about like a marriage of convenience, and in this book you follow this character who marries this musician from the subway that she kinda low-key stalks, but you're supposed to think that that's romantic. But he wants to stay in America and basically work for her uncle, who is a composer. And in order to do that, they get married. So it's a marriage of convenience. It's just for paper, and it's a formality to keep him in the country. But I honestly hated this book. I did not feel the chemistry between the characters. I thought that our main character, the woman, is kind of creepy because she kind of low-key does stalk him. And she doesn't tell him, you know, that she likes to follow him or change her whole schedule around so that she can go and see him play. And, like, some people might say, oh, that's super romantic. But if you do it every single day for, like, over a year, and you like this person and you never talk to them, it kind of becomes creepy. So I was creeped out by that. Then the marriage of convenience, I just did not buy that they were even friends or the chemistry, and when they finally do fall in love, it's a very slow burn, which could have been part of the problem. I don't love like super slow burns, but generally speaking, I just did not feel the chemistry. I thought our main character was a stalker, kind of psycho, and no, that book was not for me. And then In a Holidays, this one I still rated 3 stars. Like, it was a perfectly fine book. I think it could have been better if the forced love triangle wasn't there. I don't like love triangles to begin with, but this one was just so forced and so out of left field that I was just like, oh my god. And I was kind of rolling my eyes at certain aspects of this book. And I really did like the time loop, which surprised me. And I did ultimately like the couple, but it just felt so forced, and like this love triangle doesn't even have to exist, but you know, whatever. What do I know? Okay, and then number 7 is a book that I won on Bookish First, was What Beauty There Is by Corey Anderson. And on Bookish First you get to read the first usually 20 to like 60 pages of a book. And this one, I think I got like the first 50 pages and I read it and I was really interested in it. So I won a copy, and then when I finally got it and read it, it was really, really boring. It was kind of like a historical fiction type book where these kids live in Alaska, I believe. Well, it snows a lot in this place that they live. And the older brother finds out that his mom died, so he buries her body in the backyard and doesn't tell anyone that she's dead. And then he has to try and find a job to take care of his little brother and also, you know, be home to cook and clean and, you know, like basically be a parent and a brother. And it just lost me, and I didn't love it. I wanted to, and I thought I would when I originally won the book, but it just, I don't know, it went, you think it's just going to go in this, you know, this way with the plot, and it kind of just goes everywhere. Number 6 is one that I was highly anticipating. So I absolutely love No Exit by Taylor Adams. And I'm sure this is going to be on a lot of people's either worst of or most disappointing lists this year. It would not surprise me at all. I gave it 3 stars, so it's not like a bad book. I would even say it was like a 3.5 star for me. But I read Hairpin Bridge by Taylor Adams this year. And I guess I was just going into it with the wrong intent. I thought that it was going to be something as epic and isolating and just amazing as No Exit. But what I ended up getting was a lot of awesome car chases, which was probably my favorite part of the book. But then you follow 2 sisters, and each sister kind of has the same storyline. They start in different parts, in different directions, but it ultimately goes to the same kind of conclusion, almost. And it was hard for me to determine which point of view I was reading from, which made it very confusing and not very good. And then having to read the same scene twice because it happens to both sisters in most cases was just, you know, kind of boring and repetitive. So I was very highly disappointed by this book. Ultimately it was okay, but if it weren't for the epic car chases in that book, I wouldn't have liked it. Book number 5 is The Inheritance Games by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. This one is kind of on me because I've read quite a few inheritance thrillers. You know, oh, well, this person died, come collect your winnings, and then you go and there's some kind of game aspect, or you have to do this in order to get that inheritance, or you have to pretend to be someone that you're not. And in every one of those inheritance thrillers, I hate them. I find them boring, and I find the characters very selfish, and I just don't care about them. And that's exactly what happened with the inheritance games. Okay, and then number 4 is Goodnight Beautiful by Amy Malloy. This was a thriller that has been on my radar for a long time. It was basically about this therapist who sees patients in an office underneath his house, so his wife would listen upstairs to all of his patients. And at first it started off so good, and then it took a turn about halfway, 50 or 60% of the way in, where it just like went downhill, and everything that we just put together just unraveled in such a terrible way. So I would not expect much from that thriller. So we are on my 3 most disappointing reads of the year. So these 3 actually legitimately hurt me. They hurt me because I was expecting so much from them, and they just didn't work for me. So let's start with My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. So this is supposed to be like a hard-hitting literary contemporary? I don't know. Some people have called it a thriller. Someone who reads a lot of thrillers, I take offense to that. This is not a thriller. But basically it's about this woman named Vanessa who is kind of looking back at her life when her old professor starts texting her, and these allegations of rape come up against this professor. So she's looking back at her high school days when she had a relationship with this professor or this teacher, and at the time she didn't think that it was rape or anything like that, but now that she's older, maybe she's starting to come to terms with that, what really happened to her as a teenager. No, she doesn't. She's still dumb, and I wanted to be emotionally impacted by this because it feels like that, like My Dark Vanessa is supposed to be an emotional gut punch, rip your heart out type of book, and I felt nothing. So either I'm a cold-hearted monster, or this book just didn't work for me. And if you've read this book, let me know what you think of it. I just thought that it didn't do what it was supposed to. It was supposed to be hard-hitting. It was supposed to talk about rape and like grooming of kids, and you know, like that relationship was supposed to open your eyes up a little bit, and I didn't feel that. Then number 2, I still gave this book a 4-star. It wasn't a terrible book. It was just that, okay, let me start over. American Royals is a book that I read last year by Katharine McGee. I absolutely love that book. And Majesty came out this year, which is the sequel to American Royals. So I read American Royals, and everything was like set up so perfectly for Majesty. So when I read Majesty, and Katharine McGee just like tore everything apart that she put together in the most magical American Royals that I've ever read, like, it was magical and amazing and sweet. And then she just, like, took it away from me. And everything that I was rooting to happen, like, in American Royals, everything, all the characters that I got to know, and everything that I'm like, oh yeah, this has to be Endgame, she took all of that away from me and gave me some poorly, I don't want to say poorly written, because it wasn't poorly written. It was just some poor choices on her part on how this duology ends. And I like to think that Majesty doesn't even exist, and I still have hope for my characters in American Royals, and that's how it's gonna be, because Majesty is terrible. And I gave it 4 stars. I was highly entertained by it, but I felt betrayed almost by the author, because none of what I wanted to happen happened. And it might just be a me thing, but okay. Now, this is my number 1 most disappointing book of the year. The Maidens by Alex Mikulitis. The Maidens by Alex Mikulitis. You can't hear me? Okay, fine. Fine. My most disappointing book of the year is The Maidens by Alex Mikulitis. There, I said it. I said it. I read The Silent Patient last year. Absolutely loved The Silent Patient. Like, one of my favorite thrillers ever, probably. But then you get The Maidens, which has mythology, dark academia, it follows a therapist, and none of the female characters were written very well, for one thing. For another thing, the characters were very unlikable, which doesn't always necessarily mean that I'm going to hate the book, because I can get behind an unlikable character. The plot of this story makes no sense. And I just honestly hated it with a burning passion. It made me question if I even wanted to pick up another Alex Mikulitis book ever again. But I really enjoy his writing. So I probably will try another one by him, but I'm going to be very picky about, like, the premise of the book, because I don't even know what happened in The Maidens, and I read it, but it was just terrible. Ugh. Well, thank you for hanging out with me while I dissed on some books and told you about the most disappointing books I read this year. I'm very sorry if I talked about your favorite book. It's nothing against you. It's just, for some reason, that book or those books did not work for me. But we can still be friends. So don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I will see you tomorrow.